So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. It is week 13, and the Detroit Lions are going on the road this week to take on the 5-6 New Orleans Saints. Now, last week, the New Orleans Saints fell on the road. They went to Atlanta and lost to the division rivals by a score of 25-14. It was a game that was really close, and a defensive touchdown overall made the big difference in the football game, while the Detroit Lions a few days prior to that lost on Thanksgiving to their division rivals at home. The Green Bay Packers defeated the Lions 29-22. It was a hard-fought game by the Detroit Lions, but turnovers and poor defense really saw the Detroit Lions fail, and we saw the Detroit Lions get a little bit exposed after 2 weeks of not great play on offense and, of course, continued subpar play on defense. Both teams are looking to bounce back this week as the New Orleans Saints look to get back to 500, and the Detroit Lions look to get back to their winning ways, extending their lead in the NFC North and inching ever closer to their first NFC North crown since 1991. So with that being said, we're going to break down the matchups today. We're going to take a look at both teams, what both teams do well, what both teams don't do very well. And we're going to take a look at which team should end up being the victor on Sunday afternoon. So with that being said, let's get into taking a look at these two teams, starting off with the Detroit Lions, as they rank very high on offense, but they continue to fall in the defensive rankings. The Detroit Lions rank as the 3rd best passing offense in the NFL as far as yards per game, and they rank as the 6th best rushing offense in yards per game. Now, the rushing offense has been coming down slowly over the last couple of weeks. We were 3, and then we were 4, and then we were 5, and this week we are the 6th ranked rushing offense. The rushing offense has been good over the last month or so, but has not been quite or nearly as good as it was over the first month to month and a half of the NFL season. Jahmyr Gibbs is great. David Montgomery is really good, but the rushing game has been a little bit underwhelming over the last couple of weeks, partially due just to the Detroit Lions offense turning the ball over a lot, playing from behind quite a bit over the last 2 weeks, and really just not being in the best opportunity to run the football consistently and play the game, the brand of football that they really like to play. Now, despite only scoring 22 points last week, the Detroit Lions still rank as a top 10 scoring offense in the NFL. They did fall a spot from 6 to 7, but they still rank as the 7th best scoring offense in the entirety of the NFL. The offense has been kind of off the last couple of weeks, obviously 2 games in a 5-day span. There's not a whole lot of time to clean things up, so a lot of the problems we saw versus Chicago, we saw versus Green Bay. The Detroit Lions and Ben Johnson now have 11 days to figure it out, had 11 days to kind of get the offense right, and I think the offense will be improved going into New Orleans, but I'm not sure I can say the same for the defense as it continues to fall down the rankings, being now the 20th ranked passing defense in the NFL, the 5th ranked rushing defense in the NFL, and the 24th scoring defense in the NFL. The Detroit Lions had 29 points scored on them on Thanksgiving, and their defensive ranking for scoring went up. They actually allowed less points per game after that game on average than they did from before. So 29 points allowed is actually better for the Detroit Lions. They moved up in those rankings despite allowing nearly 30 points to a bottom 10 scoring offense. The defense is not very good, and I'm not entirely sure I have the same trust in Aaron Glenn to fix the defense as I do in Ben Johnson to fix the offense, but he does typically come out after losses, and the defense does look rejuvenated. It does look better. So that is at least a little bit of hope to be given to Detroit Lions fans. On the opposite side of the ball, New Orleans Saints are a very middling of the road team. They rank as the 11th passing offense, the 19th rushing defense, and the 19th rushing offense, and the 19th scoring offense in the NFL. They are in a below average offense, but they're not a bad offense per se. They're not 20th or below. They're kind of right around middle of the NFL and most offensive statistics, which is significantly better than the Bears and the Packers over the last couple of weeks. They score more points on average than the Packers and the Bears, meaning they're probably going to put up some points versus the Detroit Lions defense. Their passing offense is pretty good, and even though their rushing offense isn't great, any running back room with Alvin Kamara is going to be a very dangerous one to contain. Defensively, they are are, again, very much like the Packers, a very stout passing defense, a very poor running defense, and a very stout scoring defense. They rank as the seventh best passing defense in the NFL and the eighth best scoring defense in the NFL, but they have struggled to stop the run all season as they allow the 23rd most yards per game. They are the 23rd ranked rushing defense across the NFL. And just like the Packers last week, that should be a point of emphasis for the Detroit Lions. They should run the ball a lot. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Lions take the ball in the first possession so that they can establish the run early, so that they can get David Montgomery and get Jahmyr Gibbs involved in the game as quickly as possible, because typically when that happens, their offense looks significantly better, looks more explosive, and they don't turn the football over nearly as much. But if the Saints do end up starting on offense, they could essentially go down the field and score early, just like the Bears did, just like the Packers did, and just like every other team seems to do versus this defense. They're putting the Detroit Lions defense behind and forcing them to rely more heavily on the pass early in the football game, which of course typically leads to more turnovers, at least over the last couple of weeks. So now that we know how these two teams stack up, let's take a look at some of the big factors of this game. First and foremost, taking a look at the injury report, because the Saints are going through it. The New Orleans Saints have a lot of injuries this week, as Michael Thomas was officially put on IR, as was All-Pro and Pro Bowl cornerback Marshon Lattimore. He will not be playing versus the Detroit Lions, nor will Michael Thomas. Marcus May is also out. He is officially not playing in this game, nor is Rashid Shaheed or Pete Werner. All of those guys are out officially, and most of them are big-time players. Shaheed is a big-time player on offense. Werner is a great linebacker on defense. May is a great safety on defense. Well, Michael Thomas is, of course, the wide receiver 2 option on that team. And, of course, Marshon Lattimore probably being the team's best defensive player. Now, a couple other players that aren't necessarily out but are questionable for the game is Chris Olave, who is going through concussion protocol right now. He was a full practice on Friday, meaning it is likely that he will play, but it is not a guarantee, as of course concussion protocol is something that a lot of NFL teams take very, very seriously and tend to side on the side of caution as opposed to putting him in if they're not 100% sure. And then Cam Jordan did not practice the entire week, but as a player that has only missed one game in his 13-year career, many people expect him to play, but potentially be limited in the game with the injuries that he is officially going through. So the Saints kind of going through it on the injury report. The Detroit Lions not doing too bad. The only 3 players officially on the injury report this week are Hendon Hooker, who's not officially activated back to the roster quite yet, Alex Anzalone, who is officially out with a hand/wrist injury, and Jonah Jackson, who is continuing to be questionable with an ankle injury, but did practice a majority of the week, at least as a limited participant. So the Lions are facing some injuries, but it is not nearly as bad as the New Orleans Saints are having going into this matchup. Now, as far as keys for the game, for the Detroit Lions, I think it's pretty simple. And the game plan should be to simplify the game plan, right? Over the last couple of weeks, the Lions have turned the ball over 8 times, 7 times on offense. They are still an explosive offense when they're on the field. When they're not turning the football over, they do look pretty good. They do move the ball really, really well, but the turnovers are killer. The 4th down non-conversions are killer, and the inability to really be consistent on offense has really hurt them over the last couple of weeks. So I think if they can limit the turnovers, simplify the game plan, and get back into their offensive groove in the game versus the Chargers, and really for the first month and a half of the season, the Detroit Lions were in a really good groove. They were running the ball really well. They were playing play action really well. They were passing the ball really well. They weren't turning the football over, and that's why they were one of the most consistent and highest scoring offenses across the league, while still being one of the least turnover-prone teams in the league. Over the last 2 games, as I said, they've turned the ball over 8 times and really should not have won either of those games versus the division rival Bears or the Green Bay Packers. So if the Detroit Lions on offense can limit those turnovers, get back to what they did really well the first month of the season, which is run the ball, build off of play action, and keep plays simple, right? The Lions are a talented football team. Not many teams stack up talent-wise with the Detroit Lions offensive line, so lean on your offensive line, lean on your running backs, lean on your playmakers, and stop making the offense so complicated that it turns into miscommunications and it turns into negative plays for the offense, and of course turnovers leading to losses. On defense, I think it's a little bit more complicated to fix. Obviously, there is a lack of pass rush at this point. Obviously, there is a lack of confidence in some defensive coaching, but I do think there are some things that they can improve on this week, including personnel, how players are being used, which players are getting opportunities, and which players are getting reps and making plays. Communication on defense is a big one. It was a big factor versus the Chargers. It was a big factor versus Green Bay. It was a big factor versus the Chicago Bears. hasn't been very good with a new play caller, essentially, with Jack Campbell on the field wearing the green dot. Hopefully, communication can be a little bit better, but I wouldn't hang your head on it too much. And then, of course, limiting the big plays. The Detroit Lions have not been very good on defense. Last week, they opened up with a huge shot play to Christian Watson, and it was converted. Over the last 2 weeks, they have gone on the first play touchdown drives for defense. They have not been able to stop anybody over the last couple of weeks for pretty much any portion of time, but especially on the opening drive, they've given up an opening drive touchdown to Green Bay, an opening drive touchdown to Chicago. They gave up opening drive touchdowns to a lot of teams this year, and they need to not do that. They need to start faster on defense. They need to communicate better early in plays. They need to come out with a little bit more fire and a little bit more passion. And then, of course, Aaron Glenn needs to actually start using his players on defense to maximize their abilities. Now, as far as keys for the New Orleans defense and offense, I think New Orleans has to lean on Kamara and Olave. They are two playmakers, and the Detroit Lions allowed quite a few yards and touchdowns to two opposing playmakers. Christian Watson killed us last week, and I think Chris Olave is a significantly better player than Christian Watson. Alvin Kamara, a significantly better player than A.J. Dillon. They have some playmakers on offense, and I don't know how the Detroit Lions are going to be able to handle that. As far as offensive game plan, they should look to attack the middle of the field. They should look to attack the deep parts of the field. The secondary has been very bad. The secondary's had a lot of miscommunication issues. The secondary has had a lot of issues in general. And of course, the pass rush probably isn't going to get there very often. So if you can have your right tackle take care of Aiden Hutchinson and, chip him and do whatever, you can double team on Lee McNeil, essentially leaving a non-factor on the other side of this line until Aaron Glenn decides to actually put in guys who are getting pressures and creating defensive plays. But that is besides the point. Another thing, no turnovers. Obviously, New Orleans Saints lost last week's game in large part due to a pick six on defense and a couple other turnovers. They lost 2 fumbles, I believe. At least they had 2 fumbles. I believe they lost 1 from Taysom Hill. So they had 2 turnovers last week in a 9-point game. That could be the swing. And of course, most offenses don't want to turn the football over. On defense, I think it's pretty simple. You stop the run early on defense. You don't allow Jahmyr Gibbs to get going. You don't allow David Montgomery to get going. You don't allow the offensive line to lean on you over and over and over again. You pressure Goff, whether that be through blitzes, whether that be just through a 4-man front like the Green Bay Packers did a lot last week. You can pressure Jared Goff, he will probably turn the football over and play very disciplined. If Ben Johnson doesn't go back to basics, there's going to be a lot of eye candy. There's going to be a lot of motion. There's going to be a lot of things for this defense to look at. So they're going to have to stay disciplined if they don't want to give up big plays. There's a lot of different moving parts of the Ben Johnson offense. And a lot of times it works and sometimes it does not. So in the times that it doesn't work, take advantage of it, take your turnovers and stay disciplined as much as humanly possible. And you should be able to slow down the Detroit Lions defense enough to score on their defense and win the football game. So overall, I think this game is going to be very close. I think the Saints are an underrated football team. I think the Detroit Lions are a good football team, as their record would tell you, but especially over the last 6 weeks, they've been kind of a very overrated football team. They're 4-1 over their last 5 games, when realistically, if they weren't perfect on offense versus the Chargers, that's a loss. If they weren't perfect in the last 2 minutes versus the Bears, that's a loss. Realistically, they could be 2-3, if not 1-4 over the last 5 games. So I think they are getting a little bit lucky. I think the Saints are a little bit underrated, but with the bias I have for my Detroit Lions, I do think they'll be able to pull out a 28-25 victory. The defense typically comes back really strong after a loss. I think Ben Johnson is going to improve the offense after 11 days to work with them. The injury concerns leave no excuse for the Detroit Lions not to win this game, and I do trust Dan Campbell to outcoach Dennis Allen, even at home in a very loud, very noisy New Orleans Saints environment. I expect the Detroit Lions fans to travel really well, giving the Detroit Lions a small advantage on the road and minimizing the offensive advantage of the home team. I think that, again, Ben Johnson and Dan Campbell can outcoach Dennis Allen. The only big concern, of course, is going to be, can the defense bounce back? Can the defense start playing better football? And can the defense do their part to help the Detroit Lions walk out of New Orleans as a 9-3 football team? I think they can. I'm going to trust the Detroit Lions defense. I'm going to trust Aaron Glenn to come back. And after everybody telling me all week it's not his fault, I trust him to make proper adjustments and improve this defense enough to get the win. But with that being said, if you had them switched, if you had the New Orleans Saints scoring 28 to even 31 on this defense, I would not be very surprised. And if the Lions end up 8-4, that is probably going to be the reason. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below what you think the scoreline is going to be and who you think is going to win this game. Very curious what you guys have to say. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so very much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.